We've talked about this a lot in prior podcasts. When you're selling your business, openness, transparency, no surprises are critical, because if things pop up that you didn't disclose or that you knew about, it can greatly affect the value. So the whole process of the M&A is kind of broken into a number of different buckets that are critical at every stage when you're selling your company. And we're going to dive into one of those specific subjects today. Hi, everybody. My name's kdee, President of Osage Advisors. Welcome back to our podcast, Ins and Outs in Selling a Business. So the area I want to talk about is M&A Prep. And we're really excited to have with us today Philip Fitzgerald of Amplify Consulting Group. Phil, great for you joining us today. I know that you have deep knowledge. You spent many, many years on my side of the table in M&A, but you formed a new company that really works with owners on the preparation phase. Maybe you could take a few minutes for our audience, tell us exactly how you came around to starting this business and why you think it's such a valuable aspect.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Keith. Appreciate it. So my story has a couple twists and turns along the way. I started in traditional investment banking in 2000. I worked at a bulge bracket investment bank, worked with companies that you've heard of, names that are very familiar to a lot of people in the world, the IBMs, the Dells, the Microsofts of the world. That was about 13 years of my career. Ended unceremoniously, and I ended up going to a small IT services firm before I came back to M&A. I was at a boutique within a larger firm for quite some time, 6 years, give or take. And while I was there, I was working with a lot of different companies from the ones I had worked with before. So much smaller, in a lot of cases, family and founder-owned businesses, folks who really didn't have a lot of experience in mergers or acquisitions or deals of any kind, really. And the reason why I started Amplify in 2020 was basically because a lot of the clients I worked with at my last stop, they were trying to learn M&A on the job.
Right.
It was their first time through, and that's true for a lot of lower middle market businesses.
That's our client base. Yeah.
Right. You've seen it. They're going to do it once. And in a lot of cases, they're trying to learn how to do it as they're actually trying to execute a transaction. And my view is that's not the recipe for the best outcome. So I started Amplify in late 2020 with the thesis that a lot of these folks who are going to do M&A exactly one time really need a little bit of guidance in getting ready for the process. And there were a couple of experiences early that shaped my thesis around what small business owners need. And one in particular was a client that I worked with starting in 2018. It was a very successful business owner. I think the revenue is around $40 million and $5.5 million of EBITDA. So actually a very successful and profitable business. But when you would ask him what the business was worth, he would never tell you it was worth 5X or 6X or something you traditionally expect to hear as an investment banker. It wasn't a multiple. It was just a number. So he would tell me all the time, Phil, I think the business is worth $40 million. And I tell this story a lot, but where does $40 million come from? Well, $40 million, well, he owned 45% of the business. His wife owned 45%, and his son owned the remaining 10%. So we'd say, well, at $40 million, I get something a little bit less than 20. My wife gets a little bit less than 20. She feels pretty good about things. My son takes away a decent amount of money. My daughter's on the payroll, but she's a teacher and she's not working for the business. I got to take care of her. And I want to make sure my dogs and my cats are all well attended to after I go. I said, that's not how you value a business.
That's right.
And he would look at me sideways and say, but that's what I want. Well, okay, that's what you want, but I don't know that a buyer is going to see that and understand your path to 40. So the reason why I bring this one up is because I couldn't just tell him it was 40 or not 40 without doing a little homework. I went out to the market and I called 3 or 4 of his closest competitors under the guise of looking at a business that was much smaller, much different. Would they be interested in at what price? And basically picked their brains for some thoughts on valuation. And the approach I universally heard was, this is the multiple that's being paid in the sector. Here are the things that are more valuable. Here are the things that less. And at the end, ultimately, the consensus was about 5 times EBITDA was probably the number. So
in this case, 25 million.
Yeah, a little bit north of that, but not much.
Yeah, devil's in the details.
100%.
Yep.
And of course, we went out to the market. We did all our prep work. We put a SIM together. We had meetings. We had calls. And the offers came in at $27.5 million across the board. We had 3 of those. Very clear that the market had spoken. And what became clear to me in that conversation was that the 40 and the 27.5 were very different approaches. And it wasn't that anyone was right or wrong, but a deal wasn't getting done at 40.
Right.
And the buyer would never have seen the logic behind wanting to pay your family a certain amount of money. They were looking at the fundamentals of the business, what the customer base looked like, how sticky the customers were, how well built out the products were, what was the path to future revenue, what was the mix of service versus product sales. And a lot of those details were not something that the owner was thinking about as he was looking at the value of his business. So we spent a lot of time talking about whether or not we could ever get to 40. And ultimately what it cost the owner was 2 years of time.
Right.
He never got an offer above 27.5 during the time we worked together. COVID hit, of course. You know, everybody remembers what happened there. And all companies that were struggling at the time struggled more, and some that were doing well struggled a little bit. And this company was very much a hands-on, in-person type operation. They had to slow their repair operations meaningfully. So they lost a lot of time. And as we've talked about before, Keith, no one gets younger over these processes.
No, time does not stop. And as you age, you know, and you learn, your priorities start to change. And, you know, if you wait too long, you're making yourself vulnerable to the market conditions.
Right. Yeah. So that story was really why I started Amplify, was to find opportunities to help folks like this really understand before they get into the discussions with the buyers and the folks who are deep in the process, what should they be doing to know the answers before the questions even come?
So yeah, it's interesting because we talk a lot about that as well. I mean, this is totally different from like an exit planning person, right? You're focused on one specific area. It's really preparation of the documents. And in exit planning, you look at many different ways. But so what we do is, you know, we do this question and answer session when our M&A, which a lot of firms our size don't do. So we want buyers to submit questions, right? And then we put them in a comprehensive document. So we may have 20 sets of questions, and we put them in one document and eliminate the duplicates and say, okay, then we sit down with the owner. So we need to answer these questions for the buyer. And then some are prepared, and they'll sit there and like in 3 days we'll knock out a 55-page Q&A doc because they have the team in place, or they know it. And others, we drive up 5 hours to their office and sit in their conference room for 2 days, you know, getting information together because it's not readily available.
Right.
And that information that we're talking about is critical to getting to that, what I would call bid stage, LOI, IOI stage, that range of value for buyers. They need data.
Right.
And you make a determination, like you talked about, what you're willing to provide and how detailed you want to be before you even meet with the potential buyer. But it's, you know, it could drag things along. And even to your point, we're doing another company that we need information to put together the SIM. Right. And sometimes we have people can turn it around 2 weeks, and sometimes it takes them 3 months because they're not sure where to pull it from. And to me, it sounds like that's where you guys really kind of have a focus.
That's right. And you mentioned a second ago the notion of taking time for things to happen. And to me, time is the worst enemy of any deal process. If you go back to the story I was just telling, we got our final bids in the second round at July of 2019. And of course, what happened 6 months later, 7 months later, was COVID.
Right.
So all this planning and all this preparation and a timeline that we were trying to stick to completely washed away. I'll never forget, the seller called me on the day before Thanksgiving of 2019 and said, I'm just not happy with the process. The numbers don't work. I don't like where the deal is trending. I'm going to take some time off and we'll revisit it in the spring. 6 months later, of course, we stopped having conversations because no one was talking to anyone at that point. But that was a very inspirational moment for me. Time is nobody's friend in M&A.
Look, we could sit here for the next 10 hours. I can tell you about over 25 years what we've done. I mean, we had a situation where, I mean, again, preparation, like you're talking about. we always, like the environmental aspect, right? If you're a manufacturer, when's the last time you had a phase one, right? Oh, that was 20 years ago. Well, you need to update that. What's that? All of a sudden there's a $20,000 bill, right?
Right.
So I don't want to spend the money. So you're not spending the money. You're investing in selling your business.
Right.
There's a cost associated with it, yes, but there's an investment of time and effort and money to maximize the value.
Right.
So, of course, something came up, right? And then we had I'm not getting detailed. We had to put in, monitoring wells and this and that. And we finally got it all settled up, So we were supposed to close on October 31st. We ended up closing on December 15th. That Monday afterwards, the buyer, which is a public company, had an unsolicited hostile offer. You think if that went one more day, that deal would have been sidelined so fast.
Absolutely.
It would have been, no, we got everybody focused on fighting off this offer. Our client was lucky.
Right.
They didn't spend the money up front. They back-ended. It delayed the deal 2.5 months. And we were so fortunate to get it done one business day before this hostile takeover bid came in, because it would have sidelined the deal.
Right.
And all that money was spent, invested, lawyers, accountants, environmental, would have to be redone again.
Sure.
You don't pick it up and start, we're just going to finish it off, right?
Right.
You're going to have to start from day one, because things change. You need to see updated numbers, updated customer list, updated this, updated that, right? Updated environment, you name it. So how do you, so when you meet with a potential client, what is your, how do you approach the engagement? Maybe before the engagement, how do you kind of pitch your services, so to speak?
I think for me, the most important thing in identifying a good prospect is someone who's willing to listen and has a bit of an open mind in terms of what they know and what they don't know. Anyone can do an M&A deal. I mean, you've seen people who've been successful in getting them done without a banker, without a lawyer, it's not the best advice, but it happens.
Yeah, they get the deal done, but we don't know.
Was it the best deal?
Was it the best deal, right? You'll never know.
But in a lot of cases for me, I work with clients who understand there's some kind of a gap in their experience or their expertise. And I pitch that as my value is that, for example, if a client doesn't have a CFO, maybe they have a reasonably sophisticated finance director, but someone who hasn't run a strategic finance function before,
right,
and may not have the best experience in terms of delivering the strategy around the numbers. When that doesn't happen, I can help fill in that gap after 20 years of seeing different businesses that have a true finance function. In a lot of cases, the clients I'm working with realize they don't have the time to run an M&A process. What gets lost, especially with middle market folks, is that when you get to a certain level, you may not have a fully built out team. So I talk a lot about my client base having some kind of an experience or an expertise gap, like I said. And in a lot of cases, it's simply that they don't need a full-time CFO on staff, or they don't need someone who specializes in corporate development because they haven't worked in those processes before and they haven't grown to that size. But when it comes time to do an M&A deal, what often happens is there's no one on staff who's ever been through the process before. So what I try to bring to folks is a little bit of knowledge about how it works, what to expect, a little bit of horsepower from time to time if they want some hands to actually put materials and info together, but really the guidance around how to be efficient in the process.
Right.
Because as you know, once the deal process starts, everyone's running 150 miles an hour, hopefully in the same direction, but there's not a lot of time to backtrack and say, let me fine tune some of these numbers or projections or materials. You do it in real time as the questions are coming hot and fast.
Yeah. So you're looking for holes, right? I mean, because you have the experience level, you've done sell side M&A and buy side M&A, but so you kind of know, you can anticipate before you even go to market what the requirements are going to be. And sometimes that information is not available, by the way.
Sure.
I mean, you can't, what is it, blood out of a stone or rock, or water out of a rock, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes our clients' systems are not tracking data, which we always say to buyer, this is your opportunity because you can bring in the skill sets to maximize that data so you can make better decisions long term. You're not going to get it. I literally have conversations with buyers. It's not available. What do you mean? He doesn't track it. So either you want to move forward with this Again, that's going to affect valuation,
Of course.
right? If he had that information like you're talking about, you may get an extra turn. So instead of selling it for $12 million, you may have sold it for $14 million or whatever it's going to be, right? But those holes could be easily like a little patchwork, like a little, could be like a little patchwork, like you're doing a pothole and you fill it in and it's going to work, or it could be like a freaking crater.
Right.
Right. And that's the key, is that the potholes you can figure out and get, and your accountant but those deep dives where you got a major information gap.
Right. And I think that's critical. The way I often approach it is to talk about the things that you know and the things you should know, and document everything we can around the things that you know, your operations, your HR function, your finances, all the information you have about how your business operates. That should be stuff that we can put in the data room and move ahead quickly on those questions. Then there are things that you probably should know, and I like to have folks spend time working on those elements to document what we do know and where the gaps are. Can we fill those gaps? And if not, can we explain what's challenging about them? And then the last pieces are the things that you just don't know and you're going to be surprised by. And my philosophy when working with clients is to make sure that that's the smallest bucket possible.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than getting into a deal at some phase and there's something that there's a surprise.
Right.
I mean, the easiest surprise I can tell you about that could be eliminated is an environmental issue.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's there isn't one or there is one and you have a plan to fix it. Right. If you wait to after the transaction, after LOI stage, and you're literally in due diligence, and and those environmental people are very busy, right?
Right.
And we'll get to it in 6 weeks. What?
Mm-hmm.
So then another 2 weeks to do the testing, another month to do the report. So you've just taken a deal that say is supposed to close on June 30th, and you're now pushing it off to September 30th if you're lucky, and then there's a plan that has to be in place to fix it.
Right.
And what does that mean? You got to escrow funds. So all of a sudden, as part of your purchase price is going into this escrow to pay for it.
Time and money.
Time and money, right? It goes on. So, as you get people prepared to, we had a really interesting question several years ago from a firm we sold a company to, and the buyer asked, what's a typical day like for the owner? And he's like, what's your typical day like, right? They want it in writing.
Should be an easy question.
But it's not.
Right.
I mean, when you think about your day, I think about my day, but you've got a client who's running things and said, and you have to sit down, and he wrote my client wrote like a 4-paragraph thing, like, this is kind of how my day works.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's looking to retire,
Sure.
A year out. And so those are the kind of questions, I'm sure that, you sit down with your client and say,
Mm-hmm.
these are going to come at you. How are you going to respond to them?
That's exactly right. I really spend a lot of time early with clients trying to figure out what questions they should expect. You know how this works. There's typically the due diligence list that has 150 questions, and they're all fairly standard. And as you get a little bit deeper into the conversations, those questions get more precise and better refined. And I spend a lot of time early on with clients saying, these are the 100 questions we are absolutely going to get. And as I learn about your business, let's make sure we think about these other ones that are specific to you. And one of the ones that always trips people up is the question of legal situations, pending, threatened, and possible. And pending is fine, right? You can document what's out there. It's easy to find documentation to support the conversation. Threatened, a little bit more challenging. Obviously, those things aren't quite as well formed, and you have to work to write down what you can and really capture the essence of the arguments on both sides. The part that's hard is the pieces that are unknown.
Yeah.
Did you have an employee issue at some point along the way where there's a possibility of the employee taking legal action, and you don't know until it comes? Is there some kind of a competitive situation where a competitor might pop up with a patent infringement lawsuit? Again, you don't always know until there's some kind of a formal document coming your way. I had one that was also pretty formative, and it's probably, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. So it goes back quite some time. The company was actually pursuing an IPO. And just before we filed the S1, and this is back in the Stone Ages when you filed publicly. Right.
S1 is a document you got to file to get the SEC to sign off on to go.
Right. Yeah. And it discloses a lot about your business.
Yep.
And back in the pre-2010 or before era, we're talking about a lot of this information being made public early. Obviously, it's factual and all that stuff, but right before we filed the S-1, I think maybe 2 days before, we got notice that a competitor was going to sue for patent infringement. Process stopped immediately. Obviously, this was not a dual track situation. The plan was to go public, and it's a software company trying to raise maybe $75 million in late 2009, 2010 timeframe. We're not talking about a giant $50 billion company. We're talking about one that had aspirations of $1 billion valuation. So at that time, that was big. But I think today people might say that's actually a pretty small IPO. At the end of the day, the lawsuit derailed the entire process, and they went to a sell-side process. They hadn't prepared any of the thinking around what happens if a competitor shows up and threatens our patents. And effectively, they did not have a backstop for it. The company was going to stop operations. Now, please forgive me if I got the details wrong. Those of you who might see this and remember this situation, sorry if I'm not 100% crisp. It was 15 years ago. But the point is, you don't know what you don't know, but you can try to anticipate and plan for it, and at least make sure you limit how many of those things pop up.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I always say when we're pitching new businesses that you don't know what you don't know until you test the market.
Right.
Right. And then you're going to hear what buyers like about your business and what they don't like about your business. You get this big marketing study. So the fact of the matter is that, you can spend that time with the business owner who is thinking about this, is preparing for this, anticipating 75% of it, and being prepared for that is a huge value add that I think, owners should really, really embrace. So Phil, this has been fascinating. I'd love to have you come back, maybe some specific case studies, examples of things that you've dealt with in your career at Amplify. And I thank you for being with here. I know you're really busy, but we'll have you come back and talk a little bit about more detailed situation. I'll give you some color with some situation we ran into, and appreciate you being here today.
Sounds great. Thanks, Keith.
Well, thank you, everybody. Again, my name's kdee, President of Osage Advisors. If you enjoyed today's podcast, The Ins and Outs of Selling a Business, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. To learn more about Osage, please visit our website at osageadvisors.com. Any questions about this podcast or any other thing on your mind, please feel free to email me at kdee@osageadvisors.com or pick up the phone and give me a call at 860-767-3273, extension 1001. Thanks again for being with us, and have a great day.